Hi, my name's Mark Lowther, and I'm here to share my story.
Well, Mark, can we start from the very beginning? Tell us a little bit about your family.
Well, I was the oldest of 7 children. I had 2 parents. They were married 50 years, and my dad just passed, but I was raised in a perfectly great family. We always had clothes to wear and food to eat, and we never were, never had to worry about anything. Our parents took care of us. And the first time I drank, like in high school kids and friends of mine, we went and got somebody to buy us some beer. And we went up into the mountains. We lived in West Virginia, so we went out into the woods and we each had 3 beers, which I think I was more scared and paranoid than I don't feel like I got any satisfaction out of it except that we did it. And so we were walking around the neighborhood at 2 or 3 in the morning, and we were supposed to be camping in my friend's backyard. And when we got back to the tent, his dad was gone, and the lights were on in the garage, and he went looking for us because one of the people in the neighborhood recognized us and called my friend's dad. So we got caught. And so I was, instead of being punished by getting beat by my dad shared with me that my grandpa was alcoholic. And for an entire Saturday, my dad shared all the tragedies that he went through when my grandpa was taken to Pittsburgh and given shock treatments in the insane asylums like they used to do in the old days. They used to do hydrotherapy where they sprayed water, hot and cold on them, trying to get them fixed. And I mean, my grandpa, I think that was back in maybe the 30s or 40s. AA started in 1934. So my grandpa got sober. I don't know. I never knew him as a drunk. He was a binge drinker, is what I found out, that he would leave the house and go on a binge and be gone 2 or 3 weeks and come crawling back. And then my grandma would get my dad out of school, and they would drive from West Virginia up to Pittsburgh to the hospital, and then they would do the shock treatments and things like that. And my dad attended AA meetings with him after he did get sober. I mean, my dad went on and on about how awful it was. And it was the morning after I had 3 beers. And so then I was more careful about getting caught. I mean, normal people would have maybe quit drinking or quit that behavior because they upset somebody they didn't ever want to disappoint. But I don't know, for some reason I felt, my alcoholic thinking has always been when I screwed up, if I woke up with a hangover, I had to figure out how to do it without waking up with a hangover. So, by trial and error over years and years, I figured out ways to get to drink without waking up with a hangover in the morning.
Now, so how many bars did you go to?
Uh, the majority of my drinking, I was a solitary drinker. I would get in my vehicle and go up Mount Taylor and sit and drink until I passed out. And I didn't like my life. I was not satisfied with my self-esteem was crap. At work, I always showed up to work. I never, I got teacher of the year 2 or 3 times through the years that I was drinking. I was a functional alcoholic, which made it more difficult to quit.
Well, let's back up just a little bit because your father started a chain of pizza.
Godfather's Pizza.
Right. And what was your role in that business?
I was a manager. I started as an employee. I was taking classes at UNM in Albuquerque. I was working at the store on Manal. It was at Manal in Wyoming in Albuquerque. And I went to school at UNM, took some classes, got a roommate who liked to party with me. And Godfathers at that time, we didn't serve beer. And none of the Godfathers I ever worked in served alcohol. But my roommate and I, we would drink in the apartment. Going out to bars, the only thing I ever went out to bars for was to shoot pool. I loved shooting pool. And so we would go shoot pool, and it was like being in my own world, and it's like it was perfect contentment. And until I got out of that, and the people outside my family didn't even know, I don't think, that I had a problem, because the problem didn't manifest until I was in the home, which
Well,
caused 2 divorces and 2
I had an
bankruptcies.
opportunity to work with you at New Mexico State University,
Right.
and there were so many wonderful things that you did for the students there that I don't see being done anymore. It's become old, I guess, old-fashioned possibly, but they were needed things that you did for the students. And I never once I had an alcoholic stepfather.
Yes.
I was married to an alcoholic.
Yes.
And so I never ever noticed that you had ever been drinking or
No.
had any of the results of drinking.
Well, I always quit drinking through the years of drinking and being employed as teacher, as training manager at McKinley Paper. I taught at Crown Point Institute of Technology. I would quit drinking 12 hours before I had to be at work the next day. I set an alarm. That's how functional. I mean, I would start drinking as soon as I got off work, and if I had to be at work the next day by 6, I quit drinking at 6 p.m. Then I got up at like 3 in the morning. I would take a hot shower and try to sweat as much of it out of me as I could. I took vitamin A, I took ephedrine, I took caffeine, I took a vitamin B in the morning. I took a handful of vitamins to try to function throughout that day. And then I would spend an hour just doing normal things. And then I would go to work. And when I went to treatment in 91, and I was teaching at Crown Point Institute of Technology at the time and doing great. It was awesome. And my boss, I even used to go drinking and shooting pool with him in Gallup. And the day I told him that I was going to go, instead of teaching GED in the summer, I decided that I was going to go to treatment because I knew I had had a problem. Now, I didn't get sober for real until the year 2000, December 5th of 1999. So I relapsed 4 times after that. But the first attempt at sobriety, when I told my boss that I was alcoholic and that I needed help, he actually got upset with me. And he told me that I didn't have a problem and that if I thought I needed help, I was weak. But there was another instructor who was a recovering alcoholic at the Institute who was mentoring me to do this. And he's the one that got me to where I went to Las Vegas. It was called El Cabazon. It was a treatment center right by the hospital in Las Vegas here in New Mexico. And spent 24 days there. Didn't do the whole 30 because part of my I learned how to walk the walk and talk the talk about being sober. But I got drunk 42 days after I got out of treatment with somebody that was in treatment with me, actually. I called the guy. We all exchanged contact information. And about 42 days, it was 42 days because I was counting days. When you go to treatment, you start counting days. And when you get sober, you start counting days. And then you start counting months, and then you start counting years. If you're lucky, I relapsed 3 times. This is the 4th attempt, which I'm now at 20 years, which doesn't mean anything because when this virus started, I thought about it.
Well, let's digress just a little bit. Let's talk about the impact, the real, honest impact that it had on your marriages. Let's try the first one.
My first marriage, I was married to, my wife was, she was a child in a family of a lot of brothers and sisters. One of her brothers became one of my best friends. and he and I partied together. We drank together. He drank Southern Comfort and beer, and I drank Jack Daniels and beer. And we would go to the drive up at Town and Country when it was open. We probably went to the mountains 4 or 5 times a week. Got in trouble half of those times. My excuse was, well, it's your brother. And so
You got in trouble with,
my wife,
okay,
my friend's sister was my wife, and, we had cookouts at their house and at my house and at the other brothers and sisters' houses. We all partied. I mean, it was, every baptism and communion and wedding and funeral, you name it. Liquor was one of the first things that was on the list of things to do. I mean, it was just a way of life. And it was normal. I mean, we were married 10 years, and it ended, and there was some hard feelings at the end, but, we had 3 children. They're all successful. They're doing great. They're all married. I have 5 grandchildren or 6 grandchildren down there in Las Cruces. My daughter works at NASA. My son one manages a restaurant, and the other one has his own business in welding and teaches at Doñana branch. So everything all turned out great with the kids. But I wrecked my first marriage. There was a time when my Bronco was down, and 2 friends of mine from Bosque Farms, and I decided that they had a shop over there. We decided to tow the Bronco with the Nissan Sentra with a chain on the interstate to Bosque Farms. At the pass after Laguna, going down that hill, we wrecked both vehicles. Basically, the chain loosened, he hit the brakes, we wrecked both vehicles. We both walked away from them with no injuries, but both were totaled. And the cop that was there actually told me that he felt like I was punished enough. They were both my vehicles. So, my wife was at home. I had both vehicles. I destroyed both of them, totaled them. And he didn't give me a ticket, didn't arrest me, and I was under the influence. And he told me he felt like I was punished enough, and he drove me home. It's almost enabling when that happened. I mean, that happened actually again. So she was pretty pissed off because I destroyed both cars. But the insurance came through. They paid for another car for her, a Toyota Corolla, and then another Bronco that I drove. That was State Farm. They were great. Then 6 months later, that was in October of '88. And then in April of '89, I was working for Godfathers, and I was going to the different franchises. The franchise was the whole state of New Mexico. And I was on a road trip to see the Godfathers in Cruces, and I went to Alamogordo, and I went to Roswell, and then from Cruces I came through the Gila to come home. And it was fun. And so I was driving up to Quemado. I was probably a mile or 2 south of Quemado, and I could see the lights from Quemado, and there was 2 cars approaching me, and one went to pass the other, and I went off the road to get out of the way. And when I came back on the road, the lip of the road caught my rear tire and threw me into a 360. Then I went off the road, rolled the vehicle, totaled that one. And then I joked about it with my wife because I thought I told her I could be a stunt driver because I'm in these massive wrecks, and I just walk out. I mean, my guardian angel had to be with me because I should be dead now. I mean, this thing flipped in the air at 60 miles an hour and landed on its wheels, and I had my seatbelt on, and I just got out of it and walked to Quemado. And that was probably the last straw. And then it was just a lot of fighting. And I remember leaving. I bought a car for like $300 from a friend that was a piece of crap. It was a orange station wagon, old Datsun, before they changed their name to Nissan. And I was driving on February 14th. It was Valentine's Day, I think, of '90. I don't know what year, maybe 80, I don't know. And I had an apartment in Crown Point because I was teaching there. And I got pulled over at the stop sign by Futures. There was 2 cops in the parking lot at Futures, and I coasted through the stop sign. It was about 2 a.m, and they both pulled me over. I was drunk. I didn't care about anything because I was getting divorced. Because that's when we decided, that's when it was over. And they asked me where I was going. I told them to Crown Point, and they said, okay, be very careful. And they let me go. And I drove to Crown Point and didn't get arrested that time. I mean, I didn't get arrested till 91 on Thanksgiving in Albuquerque at a roadblock. When I was driving, because the person I was with was so drunk she couldn't drive, and it was her car, so I drove because I didn't feel intoxicated. And that was after the divorce, and I was living in Crown Point. And I had a friend there that we were just platonic friends. She was in the business office, and I was a teacher, and she liked to shoot pool, and we did, it was that kind of relationship. Other people thought otherwise, but it never went beyond that. But I got arrested. It was about 11 p.m., I guess, on the night before Thanksgiving in 91. I went to jail in the Burnett County Detention Center downtown. We were in one of those big old buses that's like an egg carton where they just put people in. And thank God I was the last one, because you get arrested and then they wait till it's full. So the poor first guy was there for who knows how long. And a lot of people, they could not hold their bladder, so the odor in the bus was horrific. And then I went, and then they put you in this cell, and there's all these people, and I mean, there's people in suits, and it looks like there's everybody from CEOs of companies down to homeless people in there, and everybody in between. I mean, the group of people that were in there was a very diverse group of socioeconomic people. And they called you out one at a time to like a little preacher, counselor type guy would sit there. He had a desk. And I sat there and I told him, he asked, how do you feel? And one of my phrases was, I'd rather be dead than doing this. So I was put on suicide watch. And they took my shoelaces, they took my belt, and they took anything that I could hang myself with, I guess. And I was put in a cell by myself, and I was on suicide watch until I was released. So it was kind of beneficial, because I didn't have to be with that other cell where all those other people were. They were throwing up in there, and the toilet was out in the open. So if you used it, it was in front of all the people, and it was just horrible. And you would think that would cure me of drinking. Or at least at the time I didn't think that. Now I think just like, I can't believe that I went through that. And then I called her at 4 a.m. They released me. And she woke up, and I told her, I said, I need you to come get me. And she came and got me. And then she took me to the nearest drive-up window on Coors Road. Because we had drive-up windows back in those days, open 24/7. And so we went to a drive-up window, like at 4:30. I got a half pint or a pint of Jack Daniels, JD, I used to call it. And then we drove back to Grants, and she took me home. Or actually, I think we went to Crown Point, because that's where I lived at the time. And then after that, I got arrested, had to get a lawyer, cost me $2,500. That was after I went to treatment. So when we went to court, my lawyer told me, because my hair was long, I had a beard, and it was all straggly when I got arrested. And so when I went to court, I had a suit, and I had my hair cut and shaved, and he told me, he said, the cop has to recognize you. He said, so when they call your name, don't move, don't flinch, don't get up. The cop has to be able to recognize you in the crowd. So I was the last one they called. The room was empty. So the strategy that he had planned didn't work. So I had to go up. And I told the judge, I said, dude, I know I'm an alcoholic. I went to treatment, because they were sending everybody to the care unit. At the time, it was care unit in Albuquerque, where you could go and be evaluated to see if you were an alcoholic. And if you were, then you would be admitted or committed, whatever, to mandatory treatment. But I told him I was already an alcoholic, and I was going to meetings, and I relapsed. And that At the time I went to court, I think I probably had about 30 days sober because I started going to meetings right after that. Because I figured if I'm going to court, I can't be drinking. So I did stop drinking until, I went to court, and then I had to go to that driving school thing. And I drove from Crown Point to Albuquerque twice a week, attended these classes with a guy that was talking about how, and they showed videos of people getting killed from DWI accidents, which honestly, it did not affect me as an alcoholic. For some reason, that shock treatment kind of stuff, trying to scare you out of drinking, it didn't work. It just made me want to figure out a way to drink and not piss people off and not get arrested.
So let's just jump to your second marriage.
Well, the second marriage happened when I had gone to a conference, a math conference for actually El Paso Community College, because I was teaching in El Paso, and Doñana branch I was teaching at the time, right before I got married for the second time. And I went to a conference, came back, and then I was teaching down there in Cruces. But in the summers, I used to sell fireworks for Dwight Cassendick for Delta Tire. So I had a fireworks stand in Milan. And I was, after I shut down the fireworks stand at night, I'd walk over to Love's, I'd get a half pint, I'd come back, because I slept there overnight. Because you know how the fireworks stands, they would have a camper and you would sleep there to protect it. And I was drinking, and my second wife, I'm not using names because I don't want to really, it's not fair to bring names into it. My second wife came and was a customer at the fireworks stand one of those summers while I was still teaching in Las Cruces. And we got to talking and stuff, and she drank. And so we became drinking partners and for that summer. And then we called each other when I went back to Las Cruces. She came and visited. We would party together for weekends. And then eventually I got offered a job in Grants as a career manager or career advisor. I was working at the branch when we got married. Or I moved up here, worked at the branch. We lived together for a while, got married. We had a son. He's graduated already from NMSU. He got out of high school, went straight to college. So, there's some great things in my life from those past marriages that were destroyed by my drinking. Marrying a drinking partner, it doesn't last forever. You have to grow together. It just didn't. Both marriages lasted about 10 years. The second one, after my son was born, and we separated when he was in either middle school or high school. I can't remember. Maybe elementary school. He might have been in middle school when this trouble started happening. Then I know when we separated, I went to, got an apartment over by Wells Park. At first my son wanted to live with me. And then right as we separated, during the fight, there was a fight, and I can't remember when, that happened when I got into a physical altercation with my stepdaughter's boyfriend. And I had just gotten paid from the college that day. I had $400 in my pocket. I was extremely drunk. It was a Thursday, and I was using up days off that I had to use or I was going to lose them. They were in December. This is actually when I got sober before I got divorced the second time. I got sober. My last drunk started on December 2nd, during my second marriage. December 2nd of 1999. Because I had to take some days off or else I was going to lose them the next year. Some businesses were like that at the time. So it was a Thursday night, and I was shooting pool with my stepdaughter's boyfriend. He was a tall kid, and I loved him to death. And we started arguing. My drinking always ended up in an argument with somebody. Me and him were arguing about something, I don't even know what. My son was 4 years old. And we started arguing, and then we started fighting. And I think his arms were a foot longer than mine, and he punched me right in the face right here. And my teeth went through my lip, and blood was just gushing. And the fighting was just a lot of yelling and screaming, and I ended up back in the back room, and my wife called the police. Corey Allen came. Corey Allen probably helped save my life. There are people along the way that helped save. He came into that house. He came back into my bedroom where the bathroom was. I was in the bathroom looking in the mirror. Blood was gushing from this hole in my lip. And he was talking to me about calming me down. He had told my wife to pack up and go get a hotel room. He calmed me down. And then I remember Brian Lackey came. He was a friend of the family, actually, and he was a cop at the time. So between Corey Allen and Brian Lackey, Corey went ahead and left after he calmed me down. And then I went and fell asleep on the couch. And Brian stayed there at the house with me. And I passed out. And then he left, evidently, while I was asleep. I woke up in the middle of the night, and I must have been in a blackout because I woke up 4 days later in a hotel room at the Best Western. There were 5 empty bottles of Lord Calvert. I don't know why it was Lord Calvert, but it was. 5 empty bottles lined up perfectly on the dresser. When I woke up, it was December 5th. It was 11:54 a.m. And from December 2nd, when I fell asleep with Brian, to December, I don't remember any of that. And so I woke up, and I barely could move. And I went into the bathroom, and I looked in the mirror, and I looked like a corpse. I was gray. And that terrified me. And during that period of time, my wife filed a restraining order, claiming that I threatened them that I was going to come back and hurt her and take my son. She said things that I couldn't defend because I was in a blackout. So that Friday, before this happened, that Friday I was able to pick up my son every Friday, and I had him for the weekends. And so I went to the babysitter. It was December 10th, I think it was. And I hadn't had a drink since. Well, when I woke up on December 5th, I didn't have any drinks on December 5th, but I was not normal. So 11:54, December 5th is how I started my sobriety. That's the date and time that I started my sobriety. So on the 10th, I went to pick him up. The 10th is when I found out there was a restraining order. And that she said she wouldn't give him to me. And she clearly was taking my wife's side. That I was the bad person and that I was evil, and she wouldn't let me near my son. She wouldn't even let me say hello to him. So I went to the county sheriff. I went to Johnny Valdez. He was the sheriff at the time. So I walked in there. I said, I understand there's a restraining order on me, and I wasn't at home if somebody tried to serve me, so I'm here to find out what's going on. And I was extremely upset, and I got past the angry part to where I got very emotional. I sat in Johnny's office for 3 hours. He was there. Johnny was there for me. Johnny listened to me. He talked to me. He helped me. Johnny probably saved my life that day. There were times, during my drinking, when I was in cruises, I considered hurting myself many times. Because, me losing my son, to me was the end of my kids are my life. And for somebody to try to take him away from me was, it was another one of those times that if I say it nowadays, if one of my students nowadays tells me they would rather be dead, I have to go take them to the counselor. for fear of them hurting themselves. I mean, that thought crossed my mind so many times, and maybe now that's the reason, I open myself to my students. They know about my past, because I'm hoping that my story, when I share it with them, they can gain something from that, and they know that there's hope after, because, I didn't do things that crossed my mind. I stayed here. And so, I don't know.
So when did you get involved with AA?
Immediately. The 6th of December was my first meeting, and it was at the church on First Street across from the Sonic. And I walked in there, and I sat down, and I remembered the meetings I went to AA meetings when I went to treatment. I got sober one time during Lent because I gave up drinking during Lent, but all I did was stay sober for 40 days, and then that wasn't so sober. So this was the time when I went to AA on my own, because I needed them to save my life, or I needed them to help me save my life. Because I went to, I tried quitting drinking once for my dad because my grandpa was alcoholic, but my dad wasn't around me. So my dad didn't see me if I was drinking or not. So that was it was when they ripped my son from my heart and soul that's when I hit bottom. And being in wrecks, getting arrested, getting divorced, none of that got me sober. You try to take my kids away from me? Getting sober was how I got my kid. Getting sober was how I got him back. I went 3 weeks without being able to see him. Then we went to court. Camille was the judge. I love her. She had such a calming aura about her. She just would look at me and didn't say a word, because all the accusations that were being made about me by my current wife at the time, soon to be ex, I had to sit there, and Camille would look at me, and I almost felt that she was telling me, just be calm, it's going to be okay. For some reason, I don't know why. But at that time I was sober for maybe 30 days when I had to go for that. So I wasn't completely, 30 days is a great accomplishment because we only have one day at a time, but, I wasn't solid. I was, and I was sitting there, and my lawyer said, don't say a word. My lawyer said, don't say a word, just sit here, don't show any emotion, don't show any expression. I had all my kids, my older kids were there for support. I think my ex-wife, I don't even know, my first ex-wife was supporting me through that. I know it, I can't remember specifically, but I had family there backing me up. And they would moan and groan when certain things were said, but I sat there and I was given 50% custody. I was given 50% custody. I agreed to pay a certain amount of money. I paid $1,246 a month for support for my first year because of how much money I made. I was working at McKinley Paper at the time, and I was safety manager and training manager, and there were bonuses. She took half my 401k because I wanted to prove to my kid that money was not in it. My kid was more important than money. And if she wanted to barter for money, then she could have all my money if I could have my kid. And so it ended up, she took half of everything I had, and she made more money than I did too. She was a manager of a bank. But I didn't care about the money. I wanted my kid. So that's how I got my kid. So I got him. He lived with me half the time. And then as he grew older into the high school age, he lived with me 90% of the time, maybe almost 95% of the time, because, I smoke cigarettes, I smoke outside. Our house doesn't smell like it. His mom's house smelled like smoke. He would get teased at school because he smelled like smoke, and he hated it. So he lived with me, and he would go visit his mom once in a while. And so it was great. I sponsored my son's class in high school. He graduated in 2013. So he was 4 years old when I got sober.
So as of today, how long have you been sober?
Okay, today is April 10. So I've been sober for 20 years, 4 months, and 5 days.
Okay. Now I'm going to interject here because there are some things that I remember. For example, I was the elder hostel coordinator at the college.
Right.
And during the summer, you became my assistant.
Correct.
A couple of summers.
Right.
One of the things that impressed me was your organizational skills. For example, I had a method for loading the coolers for
Right.
soft drinks.
Right.
One time was all I had to show you how I wanted things done.
Well,
Just
okay.
okay. The second thing is we took some trips that were several days long, at
Right.
least, right? And you knew how much I enjoyed the newspaper.
Right.
So when I'd get up to go down to breakfast, the newspaper would already be there. You'd already have the lunches in the bus or the van. You'd already have things organized and ready to go. So there were a tremendous amount of strengths that has carried you through all of these years.
Right.
That as you built on those things, one of the strengths of success is loving someone more than you love yourself.
Yeah, that was easy because I didn't love myself very much. I mean, my self-esteem was based on my opinion of what I thought. I mean, I had to please other people for me to feel
Valued.
okay.
Right, to be valued.
But for me to think about myself, my self-esteem, even today, I mean, I'm on my kids, my students, about their self-esteem, their confidence, believing in themselves, because that is what it didn't destroy me. It destroyed 2 marriages. I filed bankruptcy twice. My self-esteem caused, I believe, because I never was satisfied with who I was. I mean, even when I got a Teacher of the Year award, my first reaction was, I don't deserve it. I mean, even today, those thoughts enter my mind. It's like I have an evil twin that lives in me that I have to fight off. That's the evil twin is the one that made me drink. Said, hey, it's okay to drink. Nobody's going to know.
So as a result of all of this 20 years that you've been sober, you've made some things happen at the university, at the high school as a result of that. So let's close up with that.
Okay. Hope Day. On December 5th of every year when I started teaching at the high school, because I started teaching during my first year of sobriety. And I shared, and I told the kids I was a recovering alcoholic, and if they had members of their families, they could talk to me. So we used to have cakes. I would bring 2 or 3 cakes on that day because in AA we used to celebrate milestones by having cake, and we would sit and share our celebration and share how we got to that milestone. So I would talk to my kids about AA and how it saved my life, challenges associated with addiction. And on December 5th of 2015, at 7:30 in the morning, there were 47 cakes showed up in my classroom. And I had no idea what to do with that, so I made a flyer that said, it ain't a piece of cake, but there's always hope. Passed it around to other teachers throughout the school. And then I invited them to bring their students to have cake because there was no way we were going to eat all that cake. So it turned into where the whole day, chairs were circled in my room, desks were pushed to the walls, and people started sharing. There were tears. Parents were called, kids called parents. I had no idea what this was going on. But with these phones nowadays, they reach out to everybody. And parents showed up. There were alcoholics that showed up. And since then, this past year, we had our 5th annual Hope Day. That's when it started. We have an assembly. We have people who have recovered from various challenges. We have cake. This past year, we had 150 cakes. We invite the community. We have an assembly at 9 in the morning. We had 6 speakers. We had one that talked about overcoming when he was attempted suicide. He's overcome that. We've had people talk about overcoming the addiction of meth. Some of these people were students of mine who got clean and sober in a lot of cases, and are functioning in our community with years of sobriety, and they are nurses and teachers like me, and we shared our experience with the school student body and other schools. St. Teresa has walked their students over. One year Los Alamitos bussed their students over. And then after the assembly, we all have cake and share. And it's just such an uplifting experience.
The power of Mark's success was he loved his son more than he loved alcohol. What will you love more than your addiction? What will be the power of your success?